Hey groupers, Pastor Marshall. Well, second week of our study, the church, separation of church and hate. I hope that you are being challenged. I also hope that you're making some changes. I know that I have been challenged by my study in this subject and trying to make some changes. Well, we're going to look at Cornelius today. To start us talking, to get everyone talking, I'd just like to break the ice by talking about if you have lived in different places in your life, what political differences have you experienced? In our country, what political differences, if you live in different parts of our country, what political differences have you experienced? And those of you that have ever lived abroad, share with the rest of your group what was the political tensions, climate like? How different was it politically when you lived in other countries? And just get everybody talking about that. Well, we meet this man named Cornelius, and in verse 2 and verse 4, it tells us that he was a generous man, specifically generous to the poor, and that he prayed regularly. So I wonder about that. What about these two things, this generosity and this prayer, what about these two things do you think are essential for a Christ follower? What is it about these things that would be essential for someone to be a mature person of God? And then, what are the common excuses? Just talk for a little bit about the common excuses that we have come up with in Western society for why we are not generous with the poor. Well, we think about Cornelius, and people often ask the question, what happens to lost people who never have the experience to learn about Christ? What happens to heathens that never learn about Christ? So what I want you to do is I want you to look up Hebrews 11:6. We didn't focus on this verse when we went through the book of Hebrews a few weeks ago. So I want you to look at Hebrews 11:6, and then I want you to just lay it alongside Acts 10, and then answer this question. What do these two passages tell us? How do they help us answer? How do they speak to this question of what happens to lost people who have never heard about Christ? Hebrews 11:6 and Acts 10, how do they help this question to find an answer? Well, then we have Peter, we have Cornelius, and then we have Peter, and Peter is arguing with God over something that God is trying to make abundantly clear. 3 times, that's a pretty fun number for Peter. 3 times God makes it abundantly clear. And so that leads me to ask, I wonder about what kinds of things today are abundantly clear in Scripture, but that we still argue with God about. What are some things that are abundantly clear in Scripture and that Christians still argue with God about, or are on different sides of the page than God is? Well, and then Peter's prejudging bad food. That's the next part of the story, which he's supposed to do as a Jewish person, but God had said that he made everything clean. That, of course, leads to the next question, and that are, what are the things that Christians typically prejudge as bad? What are things that we in the church typically prejudge as bad, that we have religious set against some things? And then just thinking about prejudging. If you're a woman, how have you been prejudged in life? If you are a minority, how have you been prejudged in life? If you are, or if you ever have been in poverty, how are you or how were you prejudged in this condition? And then finally, as a Christian, how have you been prejudged? Peter, of course, has prejudged Cornelius, and God is changing that because all people have dignity because they're created in the image of God. Well, as a Christian, we're going to work on that. Well, then Cornelius, think about this. Cornelius is religious, he's devoted, he's generous, he's sincere. However, he lacks a relationship with Jesus Christ, and therefore he is separated from a spiritual relationship with God. Without a relationship with Christ, he is separated from God. This is the question. He is sincere, and he's religious, and he's generous, and he is devoted. Why is earnestness not the same as righteousness before God? It's a very deep question. Why is earnestness not the same as righteousness before God? There's a lot of S's in those words. Well, Peter goes to Cornelius' house, and he enters his house, and then that leads to my next question, and then that is, why is it important for us to meet people where they are? Why is it important for us to meet people on their own turf? Is it important? You might even answer that question. Is it important for us to meet people on their own turf, or should we just have churches and expect people to come to us? If that's not right, then why is it important for us to meet people on their own turf? And then, as you talk about that, it's going to make some people a little uncomfortable, the idea of meeting people where they are. And so let's be honest, and let's come up with some strategies. What are the dangers of meeting people on their own turf, and how would we protect ourselves from those dangers if we're going to go out into the world and try to meet people where they are? Well, Peter argued with God, but then he finally acquiesced, and he met Cornelius in his home, and we have salvation brought to the Gentiles. That's Acts chapter 10. But for us, we're dealing with dignity and our own prejudices that lower someone in our hearts from the place of dignity that they deserve. And so our application this last week was two-part. Challenged you, I'm challenging myself to try to identify my own prejudices. And then, how can I create bridges into those prejudices? If I want to tear down the walls of my prejudice, I'm going to have to, remember what James said, I'm going to have to listen, I'm going to have to see the world through other people's eyes. And so what are my prejudices, and then how do I build a bridge into those prejudices so that I can see the world through those eyes? Well, I hope that you have a great group. Christmas is coming. We're getting busier. I hope that you will keep up your church attendance as we continue to talk about church and hate. God bless.